In the name of our living and loving God, who creates us, redeems us, and sustains us. Amen. Please sit down. So, the polling booths are cleared away, and the campaign leaflets are consigned to the recycling bin, and all eyes turn to Downing Street. Will he be able to deliver on all those promises and in the time scale he promised? Or will it all look a bit different now he's in with a comfortable majority? Will what we get be different from what was promised? Will what we get be different from what was promised? John the Baptist's question from prison arises from a gap between expectation and delivery. John has come sounding like Elijah, dressed like Elijah, promising whip and flame, berating the gawping crowds who gather with a delicious shiver of guilt on the banks of the Jordan. And like any mass rally, they've responded in droves, coming to be baptized. But then things go quiet. John is locked up for injudicious comments about Herod's marital arrangements, and from prison he sends the message which begins today's gospel. Are you really the one we were to expect, or have I got it wrong? Should we be looking for someone else? John has acclaimed Jesus as Messiah, and now he's looking for some of that threshing and winnowing he'd promised, some of that whip and fire. And what's he getting? A few random healings, a lot of talk about the poor and liberation, and yes, all right, the kingdom of God, but not many mass rallies, not much fire and brimstone, a lot of hanging around with people, a lot of going to parties, a lot of talking. That's not really Messiah stuff, is it? Not if you read the prophets. So terrible doubts have started to enter John's mind. Has he backed the wrong horse? Jesus' response is, to put it mildly, robust. Go and tell John what you hear and see. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and crucially, the poor have good news brought to them. And then there's a sting in the tail. Blessed is anyone who takes no offense at me. And then to make matters worse, Jesus seems to dismiss John. But actually he's not. It's actually the heart of the ministry that's different between John and Jesus. What John and the prophets represented and what Jesus represents. The end of the old, the beginning of the new relationship. So an acclamation of John. Truly I tell you, among those born of women, no one has arisen greater than John the Baptist. But in the kingdom of heaven, the least is greater than he. The kingdom of heaven. The kingdom of heaven, which Jesus has come to bring about, is the difference between law and love. It's the difference between observation and participation. It's the difference between passivity and responsibility. The kingdom of heaven is about the moment when the spark of God's love catches fire in the depths of the human heart and brings about real change. It's at the heart of everything that Jesus lives and dies for. And the resurrection shows that that spark can never be quenched. You can shout at people in order to bring about change, and sometimes we need to be brought up short. It's a catalyst. But real change, lasting change, takes root only in the depths of the human heart. And at the deepest level of the human heart is where Jesus encounters people. Think of all those gospel stories of transformation and healing. They always begin with an encounter between Jesus and an individual. The individual's locked into a cycle of suffering or sin or alienation, and Jesus always asks the same question. It's the same question that is asked of you and I. What's your faith? What's your heart's desire? How will you respond to the love and healing that you're being offered today, now, here? How will you respond? Everyone wants to be set free. Everyone wants to be cured. Everyone wants to start again. But Jesus always makes it completely clear that it's not just the healing of the body or the deliverance, it's the changing of the heart and the mind that he's interested in. So his message to John's disciples is, go and tell John that. And all the parables he tells, they're like little explosions of awakening in the subconscious behind the barriers that we put up against God. He tells stories like you're loved with such intensity. The intensity that leads the shepherd to abandon the 99 sheep in the wilderness to go in search of you. You. Only you. And from our hearts, we can choose whether to respond or not to respond. We can choose to remain passive observers of the kingdom of heaven, or we can choose to participate, to allow ourselves to be transformed, so that the kingdom will dawn wherever our foot falls. The kingdom will dawn whenever our heart speaks to another human heart. I'm wary about the recently published statistics celebrating another increase in numbers attending cathedrals. I'm wary about them because I slightly suspect that one of the attractions of attending a cathedral, apart obviously from the outstanding preaching, is the ability to remain anonymous. To be non-participatory, to remain a consumer. Of course, there will be times in everyone's life when that's what we need, time out. But if it becomes our standard operating model, then there's a question we might want to ask ourselves about what it is that's keeping us from moving from observation to participation. Might I illustrate this with a couple of pithy observations? A woman came to worship with us last Sunday. She was not in a good place. She was in need of a bit of TLC. No one spoke to her. So she came to seek the clergy out in the vestry to tell us. And it wasn't much fun to hear, but I'm glad she did it. Perhaps in a cathedral we think it's somebody else's job to keep an eye out for newcomers, visitors. But some of you remind me frequently that we're not just a cathedral, we're a parish church. And in any church, the ministry of pastoral care and welcome is not that of a few, it's everybody's job. Another thing cathedral statistics don't tell you is the gap between numbers attending and numbers giving. Perhaps because, again, isn't that somebody else's job? Don't governments pay for cathedrals? If only. Yes, I am hugely thankful for all of you who give regularly through whatever means. But to the 40% of the cathedral community who do not give financially in any way, a simple question, the same question. Observation or participation? And if the former, is that good for us? Is that good for our souls? I commend the little leaflet to your kind attention. So perhaps the post-election question for us as citizens of this country is not just whether our leaders will be able to deliver on their promises, but how we will play our part in the transformation of society for the better. And perhaps the third Sunday of Advent question for us as Christians is not necessarily about what we want to get out of our church, but how we allow the living God, in an intensity of transforming love, to change and encounter us into a true participation in the citizenship of heaven.